She found him bleeding in the rain, 1,000 miles from his kingdom, and spent her last $25 to save him, not knowing the price on his head was worth more than the city she lived in. Hey, beautiful souls of ruthless billionaire obsession after dark, welcome back to the fire. Tonight's story is about two kinds of exile, the kind that happens to you and the kind you build for yourself. It's about a rain-drenched highway, a stranger's shattered visor, and how the most dangerous man alive learned that mercy is the only currency that never devalues. Have you ever been completely alone when kindness found you? Or been the one to offer it when every practical bone in your body said to walk away? If you're ready for an obsession that earns its heartbeat, hit like, subscribe with the bell for daily stories, and let's dive in. The rain on the interstate didn't fall. It was a horizontal smear, a furious gray wall thrown against the windshield by the semis rocketing past. Anya Petrova gripped the steering wheel of her aging Corolla, her knuckles pale. The wipers thumped a frantic, useless rhythm. She was 300 miles from home, 300 miles from the shabby studio, the silent phone, and the growing stack of medical bills she hid in a cookie tin. The cat, a grizzled Tom she'd named Boris, was with a neighbor. This trip was an anomaly, a desperate, costly pilgrimage to a specialist in another city, a last-ditch consultation paid for by selling the last thing of Leo's she could bear to part with, his wedding band. The ring was gone. The prognosis, she feared, would be the same. Her body ached with the drive and a deeper, familiar throb, her secret, riding shotgun. She was tired in a way sleep couldn't touch. She'd pulled off the roaring interstate onto this state route, seeking gas and a reprieve from the hydroplaning terror. Now she was lost in a labyrinth of soaked pine trees and fading asphalt, the gloom of a premature dusk settling in. No GPS signal, just the hiss of tires on wet road, the moan of the wind, and the drumming on the roof. Ahead, a shape materialized in the haze. Not a deer, a car, pulled half off onto the muddy shoulder, its nose angled toward the trees. A sleek black sedan, expensive, foreign, and very, very wrecked. The driver's side was caved in, the window a spider web of cracks around a violent impact point. The airbag, a deflated ghost, spilled from the steering column. No lights flashed. No one stood outside. Anya's breath hitched. Drive past. Call 911 when you have a signal. Don't stop. You're a woman alone. You can't afford this. But her foot was already lifting off the gas. Her blinker clicked, absurdly polite, as she pulled over 50 yards ahead. Her heart hammered a war drum against her ribs. She sat for a full minute, watching the rearview mirror. No movement, just the dying sedan and the relentless rain. Swearing under her breath, she pulled the hood of her sweatshirt up, got out, and trudged back through the downpour. Across the continent, in a penthouse that was all sharp angles and cold light, Lee Jae-hyun should have been presiding over a meeting. His absence was a silent quake through his organization. His men were searching, their inquiries careful, cloaked. He had vanished after a simple, private meeting that had gone catastrophically wrong. A betrayal from within, an ambush on a quiet coastal road. He'd handled it. Of course he had. But his car, his beautiful armored car, had taken a shotgun blast to the driver's side and a sideswipe from a truck sent to finish the job. He'd driven for hours on adrenaline and fury, the console shrieking warnings, the steering pulling like a dying animal, until the engine gasped and died on this god-forsaken road in this nameless, dripping nowhere. Now he sat in the silence, the metallic smell of blood, his blood, mingled with the scent of deployed airbag powder. A sharp, white-hot pain radiated from his left side, where a rib had likely cracked against the door. A deeper, stickier warmth seeped from a gash on his temple, painting a slow trail down his cheek. He was disoriented, concussed probably, and utterly, profoundly alone. He had no guards, no phone he could trust. He was a king in a shattered steel box, his kingdom 1,000 miles away. The vulnerability was a physical nausea. He focused on his breathing. In, out. Assessing. He needed to move. He needed to get off this road. He needed to not be Lee Jae-hyun for a little while, because right now, that name was a target. He fumbled for the door handle. It groaned, jammed. He threw his shoulder against it. Once, twice, agony lighting up his side. It gave with a shriek of metal. The rain hit him like a slap. He stumbled out, his fine leather shoes sinking into the mud. He leaned against the wrecked car, head spinning, the world tilting. The pine trees swayed like dark giants. He was exposed, a wounded animal in the open. He saw headlights approach, slow, then pass. His hand went to the empty holster under his jacket. The gun was somewhere in the wreckage. Useless. Then the taillights glowed red. The car pulled over. A door opened. A figure approached, small, hooded, hesitant. A local? A threat? His vision swam. He tried to straighten, to project some semblance of control, but the movement sent a fresh lance of pain through his side. He coughed, a wet, ragged sound. Anya stopped 10 feet away. She saw a tall man leaning heavily against $1 million of ruined machinery. She saw the blood on his face, stark against his pale skin. She saw the expensive, ripped clothes, now plastered with mud. She saw the eyes that found hers, dark, fierce, glazed with pain and a terrifying, trapped animal alertness. "Hey," she called out, her voice swallowed by the rain. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" He stared at her. A woman. Young but worn. Her face was all sharp angles and worry in the gray light. No weapon in her hands. Just concern. Real, stupid, dangerous concern. "Go away," he managed, his voice a gravelly rasp. It was meant to be a command. It came out as a plea. Anya didn't go away. She took a cautious step closer. "You're bleeding. That's a bad wreck. Did you call anyone?" He laughed then, a short, pained huff that made him wince. "No." "You need an ambulance." She pulled her phone from her pocket. No service. The little X over the signal bars seemed to mock her. "I don't have a signal. We need to get you somewhere. A hospital." No hospital. The words were absolute, final, a wall of pure will. She understood then, not the specifics, but the essence. This man, in his wrecked car, bleeding in the rain, was running from something. The fear in his eyes wasn't of the injury, it was of exposure. She'd seen versions of that fear in the mirror. Her practical mind warred with the empathy twisting in her gut. She had her own problems, a nearly empty tank of gas, the last of her money, a long, lonely drive home to bad news. She should get back in her car, now. She looked at the blood tracing his jawline. She looked at the way he favored his side. He was shivering. "Okay," she said, the word leaving her on a resigned breath. "No hospital, but you can't stay here." She turned and walked back to her Corolla. Jae-hyun watched her go, a strange, hollow disappointment cutting through the pain. Of course, she'd seen sense. But then her trunk popped open. She rummaged inside, came back with a small, faded first aid kit and a crumpled paper grocery bag. She walked right up to him, into his personal space, which smelled of blood and rain and expensive cologne gone sour. "Here," she said, thrusting the grocery bag at him, "for the bleeding." It held a wad of fast food napkins and an old, clean t-shirt. He took it, stunned. Sit, she ordered, pointing to the less muddy part of his car's bumper. He sat. The world tilted again. He watched, dazed, as this small, fierce stranger opened the first aid kit. She produced a packet of antiseptic wipes. She tore it open with her teeth. "This will sting," and before he could protest, she dabbed at the cut on his temple.
He flinched. It did sting. But her touch was clinical, steady. She cleaned the wound with a quiet efficiency that spoke of practice. She wasn't gentle, but she was thorough. She taped a gauze pad over it. Her fingers were cold. He could feel the slight tremor in them. "Your side?" she asked, sitting back on her heels. "Fine," he gritted out. She didn't believe him, but she didn't push. She just looked at him, rain dripping from her hood. "You need to get off this road. I'm going to the next town. It's about 15 miles. I can take you that far. You can figure it out from there." He stared at her. This absurd proposition, getting into a car with a stranger, trusting. It was the most insane thing he could do, and the only option he had. He nodded. Once. He managed to get to his feet. He grabbed a slim leather duffel from the wreck's back seat, the only thing he needed. He let her lead him to her car, a world away from his own. He folded his battered frame into the passenger seat, the scent of old coffee and pine air freshener assaulting his senses. It was clean, but worn, like her. Anya got in and started the car. The engine coughed to life. She pulled back onto the desolate road. They drove in silence for 5 miles, the only sound the wipers and the rain. The tension was a living thing. "Thank you," he said, finally, the words strange in the close, humid space. "Don't thank me yet," she muttered, eyes on the road. "I need gas, and I'm almost out of cash." A sign emerged from the gloom. Gas, food, next right. She took the turn. A lonely truck stop, a neon oasis in the wet dark. A few big rigs, a diner with steamy windows, a convenience store. She pulled up to a pump. She killed the engine and sat for a moment, her forehead resting on the steering wheel. He watched the line of her tense shoulders. Then she reached into the console, pulling out her wallet. She opened it. He saw the interior, empty except for a single bill. She pulled it out. A 20. And from the coin compartment, she dug out a $5 bill and smoothed it out. Her last $25. She looked at it. He saw the calculations flicker across her face. Gas to get home, maybe a cheap meal. The antiseptic wipes she'd used on him weren't free. She let out a long, slow breath. Then she got out, pumped exactly $10 worth of gas, the gauge needle lifting just off E. She went into the store. Jaihan watched through the rain-streaked window. She came out with a small paper bag. She got back in the car, handing him the bag. Inside, a bottle of water, a packaged sandwich, a larger box of bandages, and a tube of antibiotic ointment. And on top of it all, folded neatly, the $15 she had left. "The town with the motel and a bus station is 5 miles up that road," she said, not looking at him, pointing a finger ahead. "A cab from there would be, I don't know, but this should cover the sandwich and the rest is for whatever comes next." He looked from the supplies to the money to her profile, lit by the sickly glow of the pump lights. She had spent her last $25 on a stranger, on him. She had given him her gas, her medical supplies, her food, and her last cash. She had asked for nothing, not even his name. It was an act of such pure, illogical grace that it short-circuited every survival instinct he possessed. In his world, every kindness had a ledger. This had none. It was a sun going supernova in the dark void of his understanding. He took the $15. The paper was soft. It felt heavier than any sum he'd ever moved. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice rough.
She started the car, pulling away from the pump, heading toward the road she'd indicated. "It doesn't matter," she said. "I'll drop you at the motel. You'll be okay." He said nothing. He looked out at the weeping night, holding the money, the weight of her unexplained mercy settling onto his damaged soul like a stone. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him deeper than the rain, that this was not over, that he would find her, that he had to understand the source of this light in the darkness, even if it blinded him. Have you ever felt that quiet ache, wondering if a real connection is still possible? Drop a love emoji below if this opening stirs something, or share one word for the love you're still hoping to find. The motel was a sad, squat building called the Starlight. The only stars were the flickering bulbs of its vacancy sign, reflected in the endless puddles of its parking lot. Anya pulled the Corolla under the overhang by the office. The rain drummed a relentless tattoo on the roof. She didn't turn off the engine. The warmth from the vents was the only comfort she had left. "Here," she said, her voice flat with exhaustion. "They'll have a phone. You can call whoever." Jae-hyun didn't move immediately. He sat, holding the paper bag of supplies and the $15. The gauze on his temple felt alien. The pain in his side was a constant grinding hum beneath the sharper notes of the cut. But it was the quiet in this car, the smell of her, fabric softener and worry that truly disarmed him. He turned his head to look at her. She was staring straight ahead, hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel, a portrait of someone willing this to be over. The neon light from the office washed her face in a pale, sickly blue. He saw the tightness around her mouth, the shadows under her eyes that spoke of more than just a long drive. He saw the frayed cuff of her sweatshirt. He saw a woman who had just given away her last defense against the world and was now realizing the vulnerability of that act. Why? The word left him, quiet and stark. Anya flinched, as if he'd made a sudden noise. She finally glanced at him. "Why what?" "This." He gestured vaguely with the bag, the motion stiff. "You didn't have to stop. You didn't have to help. You certainly didn't have to give me your last money." It felt too intimate, too accusing. She shrugged, a brittle, defensive motion. "You were hurt. It's what you do." "No," he said, his voice gaining a shred of its usual iron, though it was cracked. "It is not what people do." Their eyes held in the dim, damp space. His were dark, probing, trying to decipher her code. Hers were tired, defiant, and swimming with a sadness so deep it seemed to have no bottom. "Well, I did," she said finally, breaking the gaze. "So, good luck." It was a dismissal, a clear, final one. Jae-hyun understood he had to leave the car. Every second he stayed increased her risk, though she didn't know it. His presence was a toxin. He opened the door, the rush of wet, cold air slicing through the warmth. He paused, one foot on the asphalt. "Your name," he said again. Not a question this time, a request. She shook her head, a tiny, firm movement. "It doesn't matter. Just get somewhere safe. For real this time." He nodded. He got out and closed the door softly. He stood under the overhang, watching as she pulled away, her taillights dissolving into the gray curtain of rain. She never looked back. He stood there until the sound of her engine faded completely, swallowed by the storm. The silence that followed was profound. It was the silence of being truly, utterly alone. No Min-jun, no park, no network of eyes and ears. Just a wounded man in a cheap motel parking lot holding $15 and a roast beef sandwich. The absurdity of it was a cold blade in his gut. Lee Jae-hyun, who decided fates with a whisper, was now dependent on the charity of a woman who drove a dying Corolla. He turned and walked into the motel office. A bell jingled. A man with a bored expression looked up from a small TV. His eyes flicked over Jae-hyun's mud-spattered, expensive clothes, the bloodied gauze, the duffel bag. He didn't react. This place had seen it all. "Need a room?" the clerk asked, his tone implying he already knew the answer. "A room, and a phone that works." An hour later, Jae-hyun was sitting on the edge of a stiff, polyester-covered bed in room 114. The room smelled of mildew and industrial cleaner. He had used the ancient corded phone on the nightstand. 2 calls. The first to a secure line, a number only 3 people in the world knew. He'd spoken for less than 30 seconds. Instructions, coordinates, silence. The second call was to a man in the city he'd just fled, a conversation of careful, coded threats, a reestablishment of boundaries. His voice had been calm, ice cold, the voice of the boss. It felt like putting on a suit made of knives. Now the silence was back. He had peeled off his ruined jacket and shirt. The bruise blooming on his left side was an ugly splash of purple and black. He'd used the ointment and bandages from Anya's bag on the smaller cuts. He drank the water. He left the sandwich untouched. He spread the $15 on the scratchy bedspread, a 10, a 5. He smoothed them out, side by side. His mind, sharpened by a lifetime of threat assessment and strategy, replayed the last 2 hours in obsessive, hyper-detailed loops. The wreck, the rain, her face at the window. Not fear for herself, alarm for him. The way she'd cleaned his wound, no nonsense, no pity, just a job that needed doing. The look in her eyes when she opened her wallet, that moment of pure, heartbreaking calculation. He'd seen the exact instant she decided, the resignation, the surrender to her own nature. He picked up the $5 bill. He brought it closer to the dim light of the bedside lamp. It was worn soft, almost velvety. There was a small, faint coffee stain in one corner. In the other, written in tiny, neat blue ballpoint, was a string of numbers, hashtag 734-91. A laundry code, maybe, or a grocery list number, a fragment of her mundane, struggling life. This piece of paper was a relic. It was proof that goodness, stupid and reckless and pure, still existed in the world, and it had been given to him. To him. The irony was a seismic event inside his chest, cracking foundations he thought were bedrock. He was a man who built fortresses, of money, of influence, of fear. He controlled everything and everyone in his orbit. And in one evening, a woman with empty pockets and a car that smelled of pine had stormed his gates without even trying. She hadn't asked for entry. She had simply seen a man bleeding and had acted. She had treated him not as a kingpin or a target, but as a human being. It was the most disorienting, the most terrifying thing that had ever happened to him. And he couldn't let it go. The need to find her was a physical ache, sharper than the pain in his side. It wasn't about repayment. You couldn't repay a sunbeam. It was about verification, about basking in that light a little longer, about understanding the source so he could believe it was real. He knew it was a weakness, a catastrophic vulnerability. In his world, care was a liability, attachment was a fatal flaw. To seek out this woman, to bring her into any proximity to his life, was arguably the most selfish, dangerous thing he could do. He looked at the $5 bill, at the scribbled code, hashtag 734-91. His phone, a new untraceable one delivered by a silent courier an hour after his call, buzzed on the nightstand. A text, a report. The traitor within his organization had been dealt with. The immediate threat was neutralized. His men were en route to retrieve him. The kingdom was stabilizing. He was safe. He could return. He could slip back into the armor of Lee Jae-han and forget this wet, painful interlude. He picked up the $5 bill again. He folded it, carefully, precisely, and slipped it into the empty wallet his courier had also provided. "No," he said to the empty, mildewy room. He would not forget. 3 days later, Anya was back in her studio apartment. The trip had been a waste. The specialist had used gentle, pitying words to say the same thing all the other doctors had said. Manage the symptoms, consider palliative care, make arrangements. The drive home had been a blur of gray highway and silent tears. Now she moved through the familiar motions of her poverty, boiling water for rice, opening the can of tuna she'd bought with the last of her change. The silence was a physical pressure. She missed the stupid cat, Boris. She missed Leo. She missed the person she used to be before the grief and the sickness sanded her down to this numb, surviving nub. A knock at the door. Not the landlord's impatient rap. This was firm, authoritative. 2 precise knocks. Her heart skittered. She wasn't expecting anyone. No one ever visited. She walked to the door, peered through the peephole. A man stood there, Asian, clean-cut, wearing a dark overcoat. Not the man from the rain. This one was younger, with an impassive face. He looked official, but not like police. Anya's blood ran cold. Had she done something wrong? The wreck? Had something happened to the man? Anya Petrova, the man called through the door, his voice polite, neutral. She swallowed, her mouth dry. She considered not answering, but hiding felt futile. She unchained the door and opened it a crack. Yes? My name is Min Jun, he offered a slight, formal bow of his head. My employer would like to extend his gratitude for your assistance. He has asked me to deliver this. He held out a plain, cream-colored envelope. It was thick. Anya stared at it as if it were a live snake. Your employer? The gentleman you aided on State Route 14, 3 nights ago. She didn't take the envelope. That's not necessary. Is he okay? A flicker of something, surprise, passed over Min Jun's stoic face. He is recovering, thanks to you. He extended the envelope further. Please, it would mean a great deal to him that you accept this. Anya's fingers, trembling slightly, took the envelope. It was heavy. What is it? A token of appreciation and an offer. An offer? My employer is in need of a household manager for his primary residence. The position includes lodging, a salary, and full medical benefits. Min Jun recited the words as if reading from a script, but his eyes were keen, watching her reaction. He felt, given your compassionate nature, you might be suitable. Anya's mind went blank. Then it filled with a roaring static. This was insane. A joke. A scam. A terrifying, bewildering scam. She'd helped a stranger, a clearly dangerous, on-the-run stranger, and now he was offering her a job with medical benefits? Her secret, the monster in the cookie tin, seemed to stir at the word medical. I don't understand. I don't know him. I can't accept this. She tried to hand the envelope back. Min Jun took a respectful step back. There is no obligation. The offer is open. The envelope contains details and a retainer for your consideration. He asks only that you think about it. He bowed again. Good evening, Miss Petrova. He turned and walked down the dim hallway, his footsteps silent on the worn carpet. Anya stood in her doorway, the cold air from the hall washing over her. She looked down at the envelope in her hands. It felt dangerous. She closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it. With fumbling fingers, she tore the envelope open. A single, thick cardstock note fell out first. The handwriting was bold, black, and precise. Miss Petrova, a life for a life is an outdated currency. A kindness for a chance is the only exchange I can offer. The position is real. The need for discretion is absolute. The choice is yours. MJ.
Under the note, nestled in the envelope, were 50 $100 bills, $5,000, and paper-clipped to the stack of bills was her $5 bill, the one with the laundry code, hashtag 734-91. It had been pressed flat, clean, a flag marking a territory he had no right to claim. Anya slid down the door until she sat on the floor, the money and the note spilling onto her lap. She stared at the $5 bill. The last piece of her old life returned to her with the weight of a new, terrifying, and impossibly tempting one attached. The walls of her quiet, desperate world hadn't just been breached. They had been quietly, politely purchased, and she had no idea if the man on the other side was a savior or a more beautiful, more gilded kind of ruin. Before we go deeper into how these two souls chose each other against all odds, if stories of complicated, hard-won love move you, hit subscribe so you never miss the next one. And I'd love to feel even closer to this growing family we've built. Drop a comment with your city or country. Knowing where these words find you makes every tale feel more connected.
The money burned a hole in her cookie tin. Anya didn't touch it. Not for 2 days. She left the stack of $100 bills right where she'd placed them, on top of the medical bills, as if they could magically neutralize each other. The $5 bill she kept separate, tucked into the sleeve of her phone case, a guilty, pulsing talisman. She moved through her life in a fog of disbelief. At work, a data entry temp job that paid in meager checks and soul-crushing boredom, she'd type strings of numbers and see hashtag 73491. She'd walk to the bus stop, the cold biting through Leo's old peacoat. She'd washed the mud off, but the memory of it on his shoulders lingered, and imagine a sleek black car pulling up. She'd feed Boris, the cat, in the alley, and the Tom's wary green eyes would seem to ask, "What did you do?" It was the medical benefits. Those 2 words were a siren song, echoing in the hollow chamber of her fear. Full medical benefits. She'd researched the phrase on the note, JH, a ghost. The offered salary was 5 times what she made now. The retainer alone would clear her immediate debts. It was a ladder thrown down into the pit she'd been slowly starving in. And that's what terrified her, the sheer, overwhelming temptation of it. Nothing in her life had ever been easy. Leo's death had been a slow-motion theft. Her illness was a silent, creeping siege. Struggle was her native language. This was a foreign, opulent dialect she didn't trust herself to speak. "It's a trap," she muttered to the silent walls of her studio. "It has to be." But why? What did a man who could drop $5,000 as a retainer want with a sick, broke, nobody data entry clerk? The note played in her head. A kindness for a chance. What chance? To be his maid? It made no sense. The logical conclusion was the darkest one. He saw a vulnerable woman, alone. He was a predator, and this was grooming, an advanced, terrifyingly generous form of it. On the 3rd day, the landlord slipped a final notice under her door. The rent is 10 days late. The familiar, cold squeeze of panic gripped her lungs. She sat at her tiny table, the notice in one hand, the $5 bill in the other. She traced the numbers. Hashtag 73491. She thought of his eyes in the car, the pain in them, yes, but also the bewilderment, the shock at her kindness. It hadn't felt like the calculation of a predator. It had felt genuine, lost. "Damn it," she whispered. She picked up her phone. The number was on the cardstock note, printed neatly at the bottom. No name, just digits. She dialed. It rang once.
Anya, his voice, low, steady. He'd known it was her. He'd been waiting. She hadn't planned what to say. Her mouth was dry. "I got your envelope." "I know." Of course he knew. Min Jun would have reported it.
She felt foolish. I can't accept the money, the retainer. It's too much. It is yours, for your time and your risk on the road, regardless of your decision about the position. His tone was factual, leaving no room for argument. The position, she said, forcing strength into her voice. I need to know what it really is. I'm not stupid. Men like you don't offer jobs like this to women like me. A pause on the line. She could almost hear him thinking, weighing his words. Men like me, he repeated, a hint of something. Amusement? Bitterness? Tinging the words. What am I like, Anya? Dangerous, she said bluntly. You were running from something. You wouldn't go to a hospital. You have people who deliver envelopes full of cash. That's not normal. No, he agreed quietly. It is not. I am not a normal man. But the job is normal. The penthouse is empty. It requires management. I am rarely there. You would have privacy. The benefits are as stated. The salary is real. Why me? The question burst out of her, plaintive and raw. Another longer pause. She heard a faint sound in the background, maybe the clink of glass, ice. He was somewhere quiet, opulent, a world away. Because you asked for nothing, he said, finally, the words slow, deliberate. In a world where everyone wants something, you gave. You saw a man, not a transaction. I require someone in my space who does not see a transaction, who is not afraid to, he hesitated, to clean a wound without flinching. It was the most personal thing he'd said. It disarmed her. She thought of her own secret, the illness she hid from everyone, the ultimate vulnerability. Here was a man offering a fortress, acknowledging his own wound. I need to see it, she heard herself say. The place, before I decide. Of course, no surprise. Min Jun will pick you up tomorrow at 10. Bring your things. A trial period of 1 week. If you choose to leave at the end, the retainer is still yours, and he will return you here. It was all so civilized, so orchestrated. A week. She could do a week. She could see the trap, if it was one at that time, and if it wasn't, the image of a doctor's bill covered, floated before her eyes. Okay, she whispered. Tomorrow. Anya. His voice said it like it was a distinct, important word. You will be safe. I have my word.
The line went dead. She held the phone to her ear for a long moment, the dial tone buzzing against her skin. His word. What was the word of a man who lived in shadows worth? The next morning, at 10 sharp, Min Jun was downstairs, not in a flashy sedan, but in a modest, dark SUV. He loaded her single, worn suitcase into the back without comment. The drive was a journey into another planet. They left her neighborhood of crumbling brick and buzzing signs, crossed into zones of gleaming glass and manicured trees, and finally entered the heart of the financial district. The SUV slid into the underground garage of a tower that speared into the gray sky. Silence, polished concrete, the soft whir of a private elevator. The penthouse was not a home. It was a museum of modern design, vast, cold, all steel, glass, and pale marble. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, dizzying view of the city sprawled like a circuit board below. It was spotless, sterile, and utterly empty of life. No photos, no books, no stray coffee mug. It hummed with a quiet, expensive emptiness that made her shiver. Your rooms are through here, Min Jun said, leading her down a hallway to a suite that was larger than her entire apartment. A bedroom, a sitting area, a bathroom with stone tiles. It was beautiful and as impersonal as a hotel. Mr. Jaehyun's schedule is unpredictable. You will not see him often. Your duties: maintain the common areas, ensure the kitchen is stocked with fresh items, a list is in the drawer, handle any dry cleaning or household deliveries. Discretion is paramount.
You do not answer the door. You do not admit anyone not cleared by Mr. Jae-hyun or me. You do not discuss your employer or this location with anyone." He delivered the rules like a briefing. Anya just nodded, feeling overwhelmed. "Will he be here tonight?" "Unlikely." Minjun's face gave nothing away. He placed a keycard and a sleek new phone on the console table. "This is for you. My number and Mr. Jae-hyun's direct line are programmed. Use it for household needs only. Welcome, Miss Petrova." And then he was gone. The silent door clicked shut, leaving her alone in the giant gleaming cage. Her first instinct was to run, to call the elevator and flee back to her messy, familiar, struggling life. This was a mistake, a beautiful, terrifying mistake. But she thought of the rent notice, the cookie tin, the deep, unspoken terror of her next doctor's visit. She walked to the window, pressing her hand against the cold glass. The world was so far below. Up here, she was untouchable, isolated. She unpacked her meager belongings. They looked pathetic in the sleek walk-in closet. She placed Boris's photo, a blurry picture on her phone, on the nightstand. It was the only personal thing in the entire space. That evening, she explored. The kitchen was a chef's fantasy, utterly unused. She found the list, specific brands of water, fruit, and simple ingredients. She made herself a simple meal, the sound of her fork on the porcelain plate echoing in the vastness. She was washing the dishes when she heard it, the faint beep of the main door, a soft click. Her body went rigid. She stood frozen at the kitchen sink, water running over her hands. Footsteps. Not Minjun's silent tread. These were heavier, slower, a slight, uneven cadence. The injury. He came into view at the edge of the great room, Lee Jae-hyun. He looked different, not in the rain, not bleeding. He wore dark trousers and a simple black sweater, the soft fabric doing nothing to soften the sharp lines of him. He was paler than she remembered. The cut on his temple was now a thin, dark scab. He moved with conscious care, favoring his left side. He hadn't seen her yet. He walked to the window, his back to the room, and stared out at the city lights. His silhouette was a cutout against the glittering panorama. He didn't move for a full minute. He just stood there, and in the set of his shoulders, in the absolute stillness of him, Anya didn't see a powerful, dangerous man. She saw a profound, exhausted loneliness that mirrored her own. It was that, more than any rule from Minjun, that kept her silent, that made her understand, viscerally, the first layer of his offer. He didn't need a housekeeper. He needed a witness, someone to break the silence of this gorgeous, empty tomb. He turned finally and saw her. He didn't startle. His dark eyes found hers across the expanse of marble floor. He gave a single, slight nod of acknowledgement. "Anya," he said. His voice was the same, low, contained, but it didn't feel like a weapon here. It felt like a thread thrown across the void between them. "Mr. Jae-hyun," she managed, wiping her hands on a towel. "Jae," he said, "if you wish." He took a few steps into the kitchen area, keeping a distance. He glanced at the single plate and glass on the drying rack. "You have eaten?" "Yes." "Good." He opened the refrigerator and took out a bottle of water. He didn't drink it. He just held the cold glass in his hand. "The rooms are acceptable." "They're very nice, thank you." Another nod. The conversation died. The silence rushed back in, but it was different now, charged. They are two ghosts in the same haunted house.
"I will be gone before you wake," he said, finally breaking the quiet. "There is no need to adjust your schedule for me. Live as you wish here. The city is below. The cards in the drawer are for your use." He was giving her freedom within the cage, an allowance. It felt more like a test. "Okay," she said. He looked at her for another long moment, his gaze taking in her worn sweater, her sensible pants, the way she held herself, slightly curled in,
as if expecting a blow. He didn't comment, he just gave that slight, final nod again. "Good night, Anya." He turned and walked back the way he came. A few moments later, she heard the soft click of a distant door. She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her legs felt weak. She leaned against the cold stone counter. He was just a man, a wounded, lonely, impossibly complicated man, and he had called her by her name. He had seen her, not as a servant, but as something else, a presence. The walls of her denial were still there, high and thick, but she had just seen a crack in his, and through it she'd glimpsed not a monster, but a reflection of her own isolation. It was perhaps the most dangerous revelation of all. He was just a man, a wounded, lonely, impossibly complicated man, and he had called her by her name. He had seen her, not as a servant, but as something else, a presence. The walls of her denial were still there, high and thick, but she had just seen a crack in his, and through it she'd glimpsed not a monster, but a reflection of her own isolation. It was perhaps the most dangerous revelation of all. When has fate ever forced two guarded hearts into the same space? Comment your own unexpected proximity moment. Did it heal you or break you open wider?
A rhythm began. A strange, silent, asymmetrical rhythm. Jae-hyun, Jae, as she'd begun to think of him, though she never called him that aloud, was true to his word. He was a ghost in the penthouse. Anya would wake to find traces of him, a crystal tumbler rinsed and left on the counter, the faint, clean scent of his soap in the main bathroom. The thermostat was adjusted 2 degrees cooler, the way he preferred. He was never there when she was, and yet his presence was a constant, low-frequency hum in the sterile air. She did her duties. She dusted surfaces that never knew dust. She stocked the refrigerator with the precise items on the list. She learned the silent, powerful appliances. She felt like a curator in a museum no one visited. Her second day, she'd ventured out with one of the credit cards left in the drawer. The city below was a roaring beast, but up here, in the rarefied air of the tower's attached boutiques and grocers, she was invisible in a different way. She wasn't poor Anya anymore. She was part of the scenery of wealth, ignored by staff who saw only the platinum cart. She bought the specified water, the exact brand of Greek yogurt, and the imported pears. And then, on an impulse that felt like rebellion, she bought a small pot of rosemary, a living thing. She placed it on the sun-drenched kitchen windowsill. The next morning, it had been moved, just an inch to the left to catch the light better. No note, no comment, just that tiny, deliberate adjustment. Her heart had done a funny little stutter. He'd seen it. He'd approved. Her own secret pulsed in the quiet. She had her first doctor's appointment since starting, paid for by the magical, seamless insurance his household manager position provided. It was a routine checkup, but the relief of handing over the new insurance card, of not flinching at the front desk, was so profound it nearly brought her to tears in the sterile office. The news was the same: manage, maintain, monitor. But the crushing weight of the how had lifted. For now. She returned to the penthouse feeling lighter, yet more guilty. This was a transaction, after all. Her silence, her presence, for her health. She was being paid in survival. That night, the rhythm broke. She was reading on the vast, uncomfortable white sofa, a book from the small library she'd started on a shelf in her room, when she heard the door, earlier than usual. The footsteps were wrong, too, heavier, erratic. She stayed still, hoping he'd go straight to his wing, but he came into the great room. He stopped when she saw her. Jae-hyun looked shattered.
Not physically, though he moved stiffly, but internally. His usually impeccable hair was disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. His eyes, when they met hers, were not empty pools, but storm clouds, dark, churning, full of something violent and bleak. He still wore his overcoat, and he carried the scent of the night, cold air, car exhaust, and beneath it, a faint, acrid trace of something she couldn't name. Cordite? "You're awake," he said, his voice rough, scraping the silence. "I couldn't sleep," she lied. She closed her book. "Are you all right?" He didn't answer. He walked to the bar, a sleek slab of amber, and poured 2 fingers of liquid into a glass. He didn't drink it. He just stared at it, his knuckles white on the crystal. "It was a bad night," he said, not to her, to the glass. "A necessary one, but bad." Anya's skin prickled. This was the shadow, the reality of the world he moved in, brushing up against her sterile bubble. She should excuse herself, go to her room, lock the door. That was the smart, safe, transactional thing to do. She didn't move. "Do you want to sit down?" The words left her soft. He turned his head, looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. The storm in his eyes shifted, confusion momentarily displacing the fury. He looked from her to the vast, empty sofa, then back to his glass. Slowly, he picked up the glass and the bottle. He walked over and sat on the far opposite end of the sofa from her, a canyon of white fabric between them. He drank, a long swallow. The silence stretched, but it wasn't the empty silence of before. It was a live wire, taut and buzzing. "What do you do," he asked suddenly, "when the only choice is between 2 kinds of violence?" The question hung in the air, brutal and naked. It wasn't rhetorical. He was genuinely asking her. Anya's mind blanked. She thought of her own life, the slow violence of her illness, the sharp violence of grief, the quiet violence of poverty. "I don't know. I guess you choose the one that lets you sleep at night." He let out a short, humorless sound. "I do not sleep, Anya." She believed him. The shadows under his eyes were permanent residents. "Then you choose the one that leaves something standing for after." He looked at her then, really looked, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. "What is left standing after a war?" "People," she said softly, thinking of Leo, of herself, of the stubborn, stupid will to keep going. Broken, maybe, but people. He absorbed that, staring into his glass. He took another drink. "You spent your last $25, he said, changing the subject with a jarring abruptness that felt like a retreat. "Why?" She wasn't prepared for the question. She fiddled with the corner of her book. "You needed it more." "You did not know that. I could have been a criminal. I was a criminal." "You were hurt," she said simply. "And that was enough?" "Yes." He fell silent again. The confession seemed to hang between them. His vulnerability, her irrational mercy, the founding myth of their bizarre orbit. "The rosemary," he said, after a moment, his voice quieter now, the rough edge smoothed by the whiskey. "It is a good touch. It's alive. This place, it needs something alive." He nodded, almost to himself. "It does." He finished his drink and set the glass down on the marble floor with a soft click. He didn't move to get up. He just sat there, in the dim light from the city below, his formidable energy seeming to leach out of him, leaving behind a profound weariness. Anya watched him. The powerful line of his shoulders was slumped. The man who commanded kingdoms looked in that moment like a boy who'd lost his way. The urge to cross the canyon of the sofa to offer some meaningless human comfort was so strong it startled her. She didn't. She held her book like a shield.
"I had a brother," he said. The words so quiet she almost missed them. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the lights, his profile sharp against the glass. Minso. He was good. He believed in the good in people. It got him killed. A pause, heavy as stone. "I built this." He gestured vaguely around the penthouse, at the invisible empire beyond, to make sure nothing good could ever be touched again, to control it all, so I would never have to feel this. He didn't name the feeling. He didn't have to. The confession was a gift, a terrifying, precious gift. It explained the fortress, the emptiness, the ruthless control. It was all a reaction to a pain as deep as her own. "You can't control that," she whispered. "The feeling." He turned his head, his dark eyes finding hers in the gloom. "No," he agreed, a terrible softness in his voice. "I am learning that." They sat in the shared silence of that truth. Two people from different worlds, anchored by different griefs, understanding the fundamental futility of their respective fortresses. Finally, he stirred. He stood up, a little unsteady. "Thank you," he said, "not for the listening, for the rosemary, for the simple, alive presence in his dead space." "Good night, Jay," she said. The name slipped out, a single syllable of unexpected intimacy. He went still. He looked at her, and for a fleeting second the storm in his eyes cleared, and she saw something else, something raw and open and grateful. "Good night, Anya." He left the room. She listened to his retreating footsteps, the soft click of his door. She stayed on the sofa long after, the book forgotten in her lap. The orbit had shifted. They were no longer just two bodies passing in the night. They had been pulled closer by the gravity of their shared, unspoken wounds. The walls were still there, but through the cracks, a little light was getting in, and for the first time in a long time, the sterile air in the beautiful cage didn't feel quite so cold. The new rhythm was delicate, a fragile detente. Jae-hyun didn't vanish for days. He was present, not always physically, but his energy now had a fixed point in the penthouse. Her. He'd leave things for her, not commands, offerings, a book of poetry on the kitchen island, a page subtly dog-eared, a bag of exquisite dark roast coffee beans next to the machine after he'd noticed her wince at the bitter chicory blend on the list. Once, a soft cashmere throw blanket, dove gray, draped over the back of her end of the sofa. She'd found it in the morning and had buried her face in it, inhaling the scent of clean wool and something indefinably him. She began to leave things for him, too, small rebellions of care. She'd make a simple soup from the stocked ingredients, leave a portion in a container with a note. Extra. She'd move the rosemary plant to catch the afternoon sun. She started buying fresh flowers, simple white tulips, and putting them in a slim vase on the dining table, a table that had never been used. He never acknowledged these gestures directly, but the soup would be gone, the container washed. The flowers would remain, their water changed. The rosemary thrived. One evening, a week after the night on the sofa, he was home, truly home, not passing through. She heard him in his study, a room she never entered, the low murmur of his voice on a call, tense. When it ended, the silence that followed was thick, agitated. She was in the kitchen, slicing vegetables for a stir-fry, more than she could eat. A peace offering or a summons, she wasn't sure which. He appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. He'd shed his jacket and tie.
The sleeves of his white shirt were rolled up to his elbows, revealing the strong cords of his forearms, a few faded, thin scars she'd never noticed before. He watched her hands work, the steady, practiced motion of the knife. "You cook for yourself," he observed. "I cook," she corrected softly, not looking up. "There's plenty." A pause. "I would like that." So she cooked. He set the table in the vast, unused dining room, but it felt absurd, like two dolls playing house in a cathedral. Wordlessly, they migrated to the breakfast bar in the kitchen, sitting on stools, the steaming plates between them. It was intimate in a way the vast spaces could never be. They ate in a silence that was no longer empty, but companionable. He ate with a focused appreciation that surprised her, finishing everything. "It's good," he said finally. "Real. It's just food." "Nothing in my life is just anything," he replied, and the weariness was back. "It is all strategy, a move in a game." "This isn't a game," she said, gesturing with her fork between them. He looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "Isn't it?" The question hung there. She didn't have an answer. She got up to clear the plates, a sudden need to move. As she reached across him for his plate, a wave of dizziness hit her. It had been building all day, a deep, familiar fatigue, a bone ache she'd been ignoring. The world tilted. The plate slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor with a violent, shocking crash. She grabbed the edge of the counter, white-knuckled, her vision swimming with black spots. "Anya!" His voice was sharp, alarmed. In an instant, he was beside her, his hands on her arms, steadying her. His touch was electric, firm. "Look at me. Breathe." She tried to focus on his face, on the concern etched into his features. I'm fine. Just dizzy. Tired." The lie was automatic, flimsy. He didn't buy it. His eyes scanned her face, seeing past the denial. He saw the pallor she'd hidden with a little makeup, the fine sheen of sweat on her brow, the tremor she couldn't control. His gaze dropped to the scattered porcelain, then back to her, and the pieces connected in his mind with a ruthless, terrifying speed. He didn't ask, he simply acted. In one smooth motion, he bent and scooped her into his arms. "Jay, no, put me down," she protested, but it was weak. The world was still spinning. He carried her out of the kitchen, through the great room, not to her suite, but to his own wing of the penthouse, a place she'd never seen. He shouldered open a door into a room that was all dark wood and deep blues, a room that felt lived in, saturated with his presence. He laid her gently on the vast bed, propping pillows behind her. "Where are your medications?" His voice was calm, but it was the calm of command. It's not," she was gasping, the pain now a bright, insistent flare in her side, her secret screaming to be let out. "Anya." He knelt by the side of the bed, his face level with hers. He didn't touch her, but his presence was an anchor. "The truth. Now." "Where?" The fight left her in a rush. The weight of carrying it alone for so long was suddenly too much. The words tumbled out, broken and raw. "The bathroom, my suite, in the blue toiletry bag, the white pills, twice a day." He was gone and back in less than a minute, a glass of water in one hand, the pill bottle in the other. He read the label, his face impassive. He tapped out a pill, handed it to her with the water. She took it, her hand shaking so badly he had to steady the glass. She swallowed, then leaned back, closing her eyes against the shame and the relief. The cat was out of the bag. The monster was in the room. She expected questions, demands, pity. She felt the bed dip as he sat on the edge, a respectful distance away. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, his voice was so quiet it was almost a whisper. "Polycystic kidney disease, stage 4. Anya's breath caught. The air left the room. She opened her eyes, shocked. He'd read the label, understood it instantly. "You know what it is?" I make it my business to know things, he said, but there was no arrogance in it, just a profound sadness. How long? Since before Leo died. It's part of why. She couldn't finish. The grief of Leo, the terror of the illness, it was all a tangled knot. The medical benefits, he stated, the final piece clicking into place. That is why you came. A hot tear escaped, tracing a path down her temple into her hair. Yes, he didn't condemn her. He just nodded, absorbing the truth of their transaction. Then he did something that shattered her completely. He reached out, very slowly, and with the pad of his thumb, wiped the tear away. His touch was startlingly gentle. My brother, he said, his gaze fixed on the wall, not on her, as if he could only say this to the dark. Min Seo. He was not killed in a business dispute, as the world believes. He was killed by our father. Anya's breath caught. The air left the room. Our father was a small, cruel man with big ambitions. He used us. Min Seo was the good son, the face. I was the instrument. When Min Seo tried to pull us out, to go legitimate, our father saw it as betrayal. He arranged an accident, a car fire. Jae-Hyeon's voice was flat, detached, reporting facts from a distant war. I found out, too late to save Min Seo, but in time to deal with our father. He finally looked at her, and the storm in his eyes was the one from that first night, but now she understood its origin. It was grief and guilt and a fury so vast it had forged the man before her in its crucible. I took what was left. I built it bigger, harder, sharper. I made sure no one could ever touch what was mine again. But there was nothing left to touch, just this. He gestured around the room, at the empire beyond. An empty kingdom built on a brother's blood and a father's sin. I control everything, Anya, and I control nothing that matters. The two shadows were out now, laid bare between them on the expensive sheets. Hers, a body slowly betraying her. His, a soul forever stained by violence and loss. She reached out then. Her hand, small and pale, found his where it rested on the bedspread. She didn't take it. She just laid her palm over his knuckles, a covering, a connection. He stared at their hands, his breath hitching. He turned his hand over, slowly, so hers rested in his palm. He didn't close his fingers around it. He just held it, as if it were a wounded bird. I am not a good man, he said, his voice thick. I'm not asking you to be, she whispered. This, what I am, it will touch you. It will stain you. I cannot protect you from it forever. I'm already stained, she said, thinking of her failing cells, her lonely grief. Maybe we're just different kinds of broken. He finally closed his fingers around her hand. The grip was firm, warm, real, a tether in the dark. They sat like that for a long time, in the quiet hum of the city below, two shattered people holding the sharp edges of each other's truths, finding, in the shared space of their damage, a strange and precious kind of peace. The bridges weren't just forming, they were being built from the very wreckage they'd both been hiding. After the shadows were named, the light felt different, softer, warmer. It had weight. The penthouse was no longer a museum or a cage. It became a sanctuary, a shared convalescence ward for two wounded souls. An unspoken agreement settled between them. No more masks, no more transactions, just the fragile daily work of being. Jae-Hyun stopped being a ghost. He was a constant, quiet presence. He worked from his study, the door often open. Anya would hear the low murmur of his calls, the sharp, decisive Korean, the silences that were more threatening than words. But when he emerged, the mantle of the boss would slip from his shoulders, leaving just Jay, a man who liked his coffee black, who read history books in the afternoon sun, who winced almost imperceptibly when his healing rib was sore. He took over her care with a fierce, silent precision that left no room for argument. A top nephrologist, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, began making house calls to the penthouse. Jae-hyun was always there for the appointments, sitting in a corner, listening, his face a mask of intense concentration. He asked pointed, intelligent questions about treatment options, diet, timelines. He was not a worried boyfriend. He was a strategist assessing a new critical front. But Anya saw the way his knuckles whitened on the arm of the chair when the doctor discussed the eventual need for dialysis. He hired a private chef to prepare renal-friendly meals. Anya rebelled at first. "I can cook for myself." "You will conserve your energy," he'd stated, and that was that. But he began eating the same specially prepared meals with her at the breakfast bar every night he was home. It became their ritual. One evening, after a meal of delicate fish and steamed vegetables, he didn't retreat to his study. He went to a sleek cabinet and pulled out a beautiful wooden board inlaid with mother-of-pearl. "Baduk," he said, placing it on the coffee table before the sofa. "You call it Go. I don't know how to play. I will teach you." And so he did. He explained the rules with a patient clarity she'd never heard from him. The goal was not to slaughter, but to encircle, to control territory through patience and foresight. It was a game of subtle influence, of quiet domination, a perfect metaphor for the man himself. She was terrible at it, impulsive, placing her smooth white stones without seeing the consequences 3 moves ahead. He would watch her make a rash play, a faint, almost smile touching his lips. "That is a very passionate move," he'd say, his voice dry. Then he'd place a single black stone and her entire offensive would collapse. But he never beat her quickly. He drew the game out, allowing her small victories, teaching through gentle, inevitable defeat. She began to learn, to see the board as he did, a landscape of potential, of slow building power. During one game, she made a surprisingly clever move, capturing a cluster of his stones. She let out a small, triumphant laugh, a sound so rare and light it seemed to startle both of them. Jae-hyun looked from the board to her face, his expression softening into something so open and tender it made her breath catch. "There," he said softly, "you see the shape of it now." She wasn't sure if he meant the game or something else entirely. Their conversations drifted into the personal, no longer anchored by crisis. She told him about Leo, not the sick Leo, but the vibrant, funny man who'd loved bad science fiction movies and had proposed to her in a laundromat because it was where their life together really started, clean and warm. Jae-hyun listened, his eyes never leaving her face. In return, he shared fragments of a life before the empire, a stubborn, brilliant mother who died young. Min So teaches him to ride a bike, a longing for the simplicity of the sea near Busan, a place he hadn't visited in 15 years. He began to bring her things, not expensive gifts, but thoughtful ones, a first edition of a novel she'd mentioned loving, a ridiculously soft pair of socks because he'd noticed her feet were always cold. One day, he came home with a small, scraggly tomato plant. "For the rosemary," he said, placing it on the windowsill, "so it is not alone." The care was a language they were both learning to speak. Anya, in turn, started mending things, a loose button on his favorite shirt, the torn page in one of his history books, small domestic acts of repair that felt more intimate than any kiss. The physical space between them diminished by imperceptible degrees. On the sofa, watching an old movie, their shoulders would brush. Passing in the hallway, his hand would come up to steady her elbow, a touch that lingered. When a thunderstorm rattled the tower one night, he found her staring out at the lightning, arms wrapped around herself. He didn't speak, he just stood beside her, his solid presence a bulwark against the chaos, their reflections together in the dark glass. One afternoon, she had a bad day. The fatigue was a lead blanket, the pain a dull, persistent throb. She stayed in her room, dozing fitfully. She woke to find him sitting in the armchair by her window, reading. The afternoon light gilded his profile. He looked up, marked his page. "You should drink something." He gestured to a glass of water on her nightstand she hadn't noticed. "You don't have to sit with me," she said, her voice rough with sleep. "I know." He went back to his book. He stayed until she fell asleep again, the gentle rustle of his turning pages the last thing she heard. It was during these weeks that the $5 bill resurfaced. She'd been looking for a bookmark and opened the history book he'd left on the breakfast bar. There, pressed flat between the pages detailing the Goryeo dynasty, was the bill, 73491. He had kept it, not in a wallet, but here, in something he valued. She didn't mention it. She simply slipped it back, her heart full. The tender fusion was not without its fractures. Sometimes he would come home with a look in his eyes that was pure, wintry distance. The boss. He would withdraw, the walls slamming down. She learned not to reach for him in those moments, to give him space to shed the violence of his other world. He always came back, the ice in his gaze melting into a quiet, grateful exhaustion when he saw her, alive and there.
And sometimes her own fear would surge, the fear of dependency, of loving a man whose world could crush her, of her body's inevitable betrayal. She would pull back, become polite, distant. He would sense it, his own movements turning careful, formal, the dance of two people terrified of needing too much. But the orbit held. The gravitational pull between them was stronger than their fear. One evening, after a quiet game of Baduk that she almost won, he didn't reset the board. He just looked at her, the city lights twinkling in his dark eyes. "This," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. "This is what I was building, all those years, and I never knew it." "What?" she whispered. "A place," he said, his gaze sweeping over the room, the plants on the sill, her book on the table, the cashmere throw tangled on the sofa. A place to come home to. Anya felt the truth of it settle in her bones, warm and terrifying. This fragile, tender thing they were building, this was the real empire, and it was more vulnerable and more precious than anything made of money or fear. She reached across the Baduk board, her fingers scattering the black and white stones with a soft clatter. She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. No words, just the solid, steady pressure of skin on skin, a silent vow in the quiet heart of their shared world. The fusion was complete. They were no longer two broken halves. They were a whole, complicated, fragile new thing. And they both knew, with a certainty that was both joy and dread, that anything this beautiful would have to be fought for. After the shatter and the reunion, how has unexpected love, or the hope of one, changed you forever? Share your transformation below. Let's fill this space with proof that second chances are real. Their fragile peace is built on secrets that could shatter it all. As we stand on this precipice, what do you think happens next? Can a love born in the rain survive the coming storm? Comment your prediction with a single word, safe or shatter. And if you want to follow Anya and Jay into the dangerous heart of his world, hit subscribe for more tales of the hidden strength behind invisible faces. The piece was a soap bubble, shimmering, perfect, and doomed to pop.
It happened on a Tuesday. Anya had a good day, energy humming at a low, pleasant frequency. She'd gone for a short walk in the tower's manicured park with Jae-hyun's discreet security shadow, a new, grudgingly accepted part of her life, and had bought fresh basil from a market stall. She wanted to make pesto, a rebellion against the clinical chef's meals, something alive and pungent. Jae-hyun was in Tokyo for 48 hours. A necessary trip, he'd said, his hand cupping her cheek before he left, his thumb stroking the line of her jaw. 2 days. I will call. The distance felt novel, almost exciting, a chance to miss him. She was in the kitchen, the scent of garlic and pine nuts filling the air, her phone propped up playing music, when the penthouse door beeped. Early. He wasn't due back for another day. Her heart gave a little leap. She wiped her hands, a smile already forming. Jay, you're early. It wasn't Jae-hyun. 3 men stood in the entryway. They weren't Min-jun or any of the polished, silent guards she'd grown accustomed to seeing. These men were different, harder. Their eyes held a flat, predatory gleam. One, a man with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, looked her up and down with a cold, appraising smirk. Anya Petrova, Scar said. It wasn't a question. Ice flooded her veins. Who are you? How did you get in here? Her voice was steady, but her hands had started to tremble. Your key card, the man said, holding up a familiar platinum card. Her key card. She'd left it in the pocket of her jacket after her walk. The security shadow. He must have been more than just a shadow. He'd been a plant. This was planned, professional. Mr. Lee is expecting you, Scar said, his tone leaving no doubt that it was not a request. I'm not going anywhere with you. She backed towards the kitchen island, her mind racing. The panic button. Jay had shown her a discreet one under the lip of the breakfast bar. She edged closer. Don't make it difficult, another man said, stepping forward. We have orders not to hurt you unless we have to. The threat was clear. They would drag her out screaming, and someone, a neighbor, a delivery person, might see, or they would hurt her here, in the sanctuary. She thought of Jae-hyun's violent world, finally breaching the walls. She thought of the tomato plant on the windowsill. With a surge of desperate courage, she slapped her palm under the bar, hitting the button. A silent alarm. Min-jun would be notified. Someone would come. Scar's smirk vanished. Stupid. He moved fast, a blur of motion. A hand clamped over her mouth, stifling her scream. Another arm snaked around her waist, lifting her off her feet. She kicked, twisted, and bit down on the gloved hand. He cursed, but didn't let go.
The world became a frantic, muffled struggle. The scent of the pesto, so cheerful moments before, now smelled like the last moment of her old life. They dragged her through the penthouse, past the sofa where they'd played Baduk, past the rosemary plant. She saw it all in a series of snapshots. The blanket on the floor, her book splayed open, the unfinished games still on the table. Then a prick in her neck, a cold, sharp sting. The world softened at the edges, then went black. Jae-hyun felt the disturbance in the force of his world before his phone even buzzed, a tightening in his chest, a primal sense of wrongness. He was in a conference room in Roppongi, the air thick with tension and the smell of green tea. The meeting was a delicate, brutal negotiation over territory. He was winning. His phone vibrated on the table, a specific pattern, the penthouse alarm. His blood turned to slurry in his veins. He held up a single finger, silencing the man across from him. He answered. Min-jun's voice, tight with fear. Boss, it's Anya. She's gone. The penthouse was breached. Her keycard was used. Park's man, the new one, he's missing. A red haze descended over Jae-hyun's vision. The room, the men, the city outside the window, all of it ceased to exist. There was only the void where Anya had been, and the roaring inferno of his rage. Who? The word was not human. We're tracing. The methods, it's clean, professional.
It has the signature of the Choi faction. Choi, the old rival, the one who'd been probing his borders, the one he'd been trying to contain with diplomacy and targeted pressure, the one who must have discovered his weakness. Her. Betrayal was a double-edged sword. Park, his most trusted, his old guard, a traitor? Or was it the new man? It didn't matter. The result was the same. He ended the call. He stood up. The men in the room watched him, sensing the seismic shift. "This meeting is over," Jae-hyun said, his voice a terrifying calm. "The terms are now mine. You will cede the docks, all of them, by sunrise, or I will burn everything you have to the ground and salt the earth." The head of the opposing faction, a proud old man, scoffed. "You are in no position to make threats, Lee. You are out of your territory." In a movement faster than the eye could follow, Jae-hyun had a letter opener from the table pressed against the old man's jugular. His eyes were black holes of promised annihilation. "I am everywhere," he hissed, "and you have just made the mistake of thinking my territory has borders. Do we understand each other?" The old man, feeling the cold steel, seeing the utter absence of humanity in Jae-hyun's face, nodded once, a bead of blood welling under the point. Jae-hyun released him, turned, and walked out. His private jet was wheels up within the hour. The flight was a 9-hour descent into hell. He stared at the clouds, seeing nothing but her face, her laugh over the baduk board, the feel of her hand in his, the way she looked sleeping in his chair, and then the other images, the ones his mind conjured against his will. Her frightened, her hurt, her gone. The vulnerability he'd come to cherish was now the weapon used to eviscerate him. He had been a fool, a romantic, sentimental fool. He'd allowed a sunbeam into his fortress, and his enemies had simply used it to find the cracks in the walls. By the time he landed, the rage had crystallized into something colder, harder, and more lethal than anything he'd ever been. The boss was back, but amplified, a demon of vengeance. Min-jun met him in the garage, his face ashen. "We have a location, an old warehouse by the docks. Choi's people. They've made no demands. They're just holding her." Park? Gone. His accounts were cleared yesterday. It was him. The betrayal from within was the final confirming twist of the knife. He had been blind. He had been so focused on building a home with her that he'd neglected the moat. "Gather everyone," Jae-hyun said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "We go in 2 hours." "Boss, if we go in loud, they might." Min-jun couldn't finish. "She is a liability now," Jae-hyun said, the words tasting like ash and broken glass. He was thinking aloud, slipping into the cold calculus that had kept him alive for decades. "They took her to get to me. She has seen their faces. She knows the penthouse. She is a witness, and she is connected to me." He closed his eyes, the pain physical. Choi would not be so stupid as to take her unless he had a plan to use her or to remove her. The fact that there are no demands, it is not a negotiation, it is a statement. A horrible, icy logic was assembling itself. The timing, the cleanliness of the grab, the use of Park, his most trusted. This wasn't just a grab for power. This was a surgical strike designed to gut him emotionally and strategically. And Anya, beautiful, kind, innocent Anya, was both the weapon and the casualty. His mind, traitorously, supplied the worst possibility. What if it was all a play? What if her illness, her vulnerability, her entire story, what if it had been an act, a long con by Choi to embed a weakness in his very core? The depth of the betrayal would be biblical. It was the kind of strategic poison his own father would have concocted. The doubt, poisonous and insidious, seeped into the cracks of his terror. He saw her handing him the $5 bill. Was that the moment the play began? Her reluctance to take the job, was it part of the script? Her tears, her confessions, could they be that good? The love and the fear curdled into a sickening suspicion. He felt his heart, the one she had tenderly unthawed, begin to frost over again, this time with a layer of bitter, protective ice. "We proceed on the assumption she is compromised," he heard himself say, the words a death sentence for what they had built. "Secure the perimeter, eliminate all hostiles, retrieve the asset. I will assess her status upon retrieval." Min-jun looked at him, a flicker of horror in his eyes. He had seen Jae-hyun in many modes, but never this, a man systematically disassembling his own soul to survive the pain. "Yes, boss." As Min-jun turned to go, Jae-hyun's hand shot out, gripping his arm. The mask slipped for a second, and the raw, bleeding agony beneath was exposed. "But if there is a chance, even one chance, she is still her. You get her out first. Do you understand? Before anything else." Min-jun nodded, his own resolve hardening. "We'll get her back, boss." Jae-hyun was east him. He was alone in the dim garage. He leaned against the cold concrete wall, sliding down until he sat on the ground, his head in his hands. He had found heaven in her eyes, and now he was preparing to burn it down himself, just in case it was hell in disguise. The abyss had opened, and he was falling with nothing to hold on to but the shattered memory of a kindness he could no longer afford to believe in. The warehouse was a tomb of rust and cold sea air. Anya woke on a concrete floor, the drug leaving an oily, metallic taste in her mouth and a pounding in her head. A single bare bulb swung from a high rafter, casting dizzying arcs of light and shadow. Her hands were bound with zip ties behind her back. Fear was a live animal in her chest, gnawing at her ribs. But beneath it, a colder, sharper edge was forming. Clarity. This was the other world. Jay's world, the one he'd tried to shield her from. It had found her. Scar and another man played cards on an upturned crate nearby. They spoke in low Korean, laughing at something. They ignored her. That was almost worse than their attention. She thought of Jay. He would know by now. He would be coming. The thought was a flare of hope, instantly doused by a wave of terror. What would his coming look like? More men like these? More violence? She remembered the storm in his eyes that first night he'd come home shattered. That violence, directed for her. It was a terrifying prospect. Hours passed, or minutes. Time was liquid in the cold. The pain in her kidneys, always a background hum, began to crescendo into a sharp, demanding ache. Stress, dehydration. She tried to breathe through it, to make herself small and unnoticed. The door of the warehouse screeched open. A new man walked in, older, dressed in a fine camel hair coat that looked absurd in the grime. Choi. She knew it instinctively. He had the same air of calculated control as Jay, but it was thinner, meaner, layered over desperation. He stopped in front of her, looking down as if she were an interesting insect. "The famous Anya," he said in accented English. "Lee Jae-hyun's little saint. You cost me a very good man inside his organization. And for what? A dying woman?" The words "dying woman" hit her more force than a slap. He knew. Of course he knew. Park would have told him everything. "He will come for you," Choi mused, circling her. "The great Lee Jae-hyun, brought low by a sick girl. He will walk right into the trap. And when he does," he smiled, a chilling sight. "I wonder what he will think when he finds out his precious saint was the key that unlocked his door." Anya said nothing. She locked her eyes on a rust spot on the floor, focusing on it, building a wall in her mind. Park showed us the medical files. Very expensive, very secret treatments, paid for by Lee. A perfect leash for a perfect pawn. "Tell me,
Did you cry when you told him about your poor, failing kidneys? Was he very moved?
She flinched. He was twisting it, poisoning the most sacred, vulnerable truth they shared. He will wonder, you know, Choi pressed, leaning closer. His breath smelled of cigarettes and mint. A man like him, trust is not his nature. He will look at you in this place and he will think, how convenient. The sick woman, the perfect victim, the one who spent her last $25. Was it a good performance? I almost believe it myself. The poison was seeping in. She could see it, the narrative he was crafting for Jay's arrival, the ultimate betrayal, a sick, desperate woman playing a long con. Her own actions, her genuine fear and love were being used as evidence against her. A deep, defiant anger began to burn through the fear. This man, this world would not take what she and Jay had built. It would not turn her love into a weapon against him. She lifted her head and met Choi's eyes. "He'll know," she said, her voice scratchy but clear. "He'll know the truth." Choi laughed. "The truth is what survives, girl. And in a few hours, the only truth will be that you were the flaw in his armor, and I will be the one who exploited it." He straightened, his face hardening. "Get her ready. He will be here soon." Across the city, in the war room of his corporate headquarters, Jae-han was a statue of focused annihilation. Screens showed blueprints of the warehouse, thermal signatures, and the positions of his men. He was clad in tactical black, a stark contrast to the usual tailored suits. He looked like what he was, a warlord. Min Jun approached. Teams Alpha and Beta are in position. Choi has 12, maybe 15 men inside. No sign of her on the thermal. She's likely in the central room, cold. Jae-han nodded, his jaw a hard line. The plan was simple, brutal. A frontal diversion. A silent team is going in through the roof to extract her. Then, clean up. But the poison of doubt Choi had expertly injected was working. How convenient. The words echoed. Park's betrayal was too complete. The access to her private medical files, it felt like a staged revelation. What if her entire presence had been a masterclass in manipulation designed by Choi to rot him from the inside out? He saw her face, pale and worried, handing him the $5 bill. Was that the first move of the long game? He heard her laugh during their badut game. Could a laugh be faked that perfectly? He felt the weight of her head on his shoulder during the thunderstorm. Was that a calculated vulnerability? The love and the suspicion warred, tearing him apart. To believe in her was to be potentially the greatest fool who ever lived. To doubt her was to murder the only good thing he ever created.
He walked to a secure cabinet, unlocked it. Inside, among encrypted drives and weapons, was a simple, slim frame. He took it out. It held the $5 bill, 734-91. He'd had it framed after finding it in his book, a silent testament to the moment his world changed. He stared at the worn paper, the coffee stain, the tiny numbers. A pawn in a game would not have a $5 bill with a laundry coat on it. A con artist would not keep a pot of rosemary alive on a windowsill. A plant would not look at him with eyes that held no greed, only a desperate, beautiful hope. The ice in his heart cracked. This was the crossroads. He could armor up, become the pure, unsentimental boss, treat her as a compromised asset to be secured and interrogated. It was the safe play, the smart play. Or he could choose faith. He could choose the memory of the rain, the pesto on the counter, her hand in his. He could bet his life, his empire, his very soul on the authenticity of a single, selfless act. He touched the glass over the $5 bill. He thought of her saying, "Maybe we're just different kinds of broken." He made his choice. "Change of plan," he said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. Every operative turned to look. "The extraction team's sole objective is Anya Petrova.
Their only priority is her safety, unharmed. They will disengage and retreat the moment they have her, regardless of the larger engagement. Do you understand? She is not an asset. She is the mission. Min Jun's shoulders relaxed a fraction. He nodded. Understood. Jae-hyun slid the framed bill into the inner pocket of his tactical vest, against his heart. A talisman, a promise. Let's go bring her home. In the warehouse, the waiting was over. Shouts in Korean, the sound of running feet, a distant crump that shook dust from the rafters, the diversion. Scar yanked Anya to her feet. Time to go, sweetheart. He pushed her toward a side door. Gunfire erupted, not distant anymore, close, deafening in the metal space. Muzzle flashes lit the gloom like strobes. Men shouted, screamed, fell. Anya stumbled, her world a chaos of noise and terror. Scar's grip on her arm was iron tight, dragging her through a maze of containers. He was using her as a shield, his gun pressed to her temple. They burst out into a loading bay area, the cold night air a shock. A black SUV idled, its door open. A figure stepped out of the shadows in front of them. Jae-hyun.
He stood alone in the open, no weapon in his hands. His face was calm, but his eyes were twin supernovas of fury fixed on the man holding her. "Let her go, Choi's dog," Jae-hyun said, his voice cutting through the sporadic gunfire from inside, "and I will let you run." Scar laughed, tightening his arm around Anya's throat. "Or what? You'll shoot? You might hit your little saint." Anya met Jae-hyun's eyes over Scar's arm. In that split second, 1,000 conversations passed between them. Her fear, his rage, and beneath it, a thread of pure, unbreakable connection. She saw his gaze flicker just for an instant to her bound hands behind her back, a barely perceptible nod. She knew what to do. As Scar's attention was locked on Jae-hyun, she went utterly limp, a dead weight. It was a move of desperation, of utter trust. Scar, caught off balance, grunted, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all Jae-hyun needed. He moved, a blur of black, not toward Scar, but to the side, grabbing a length of rusted metal pipe on the ground. As Scar swung his gun toward him, Jae-hyun threw the pipe not at Scar, but at the SUV's front tire. It struck with a loud thwack. The distraction was enough. Jae-hyun closed the distance. His hand shot out, not for the gun, but for Scar's wrist. A sharp, brutal twist, a sickening crack. Scar screamed, the gun clattering to the ground. Jae-hyun pivoted, pulling Anya free and shoving her behind him in one fluid motion. He stood between her and Scar, a human wall. Scar clutched his broken wrist, snarling. He lunged with his other hand, a knife flashing. Jae-hyun didn't flinch. He caught the knife arm, drove his forehead into Scar's nose with a crunch, then swept his legs out from under him. Scar hit the concrete hard and didn't move. Silence, sudden and ringing, descended. The gunfire inside had stopped. Jae-hyun turned. He was breathing heavily, his knuckles bloody. His eyes found hers, scanning her frantically for injury. Anya. That one word held everything. The fear, the doubt, the choice, the desperate, unbreakable love. She stumbled toward him, her hands still bound. He caught her, his arms wrapping around her, holding her so tightly she could feel the hard edge of the frame in his vest press into her, and the frantic, pounding beat of his heart against hers. He buried his face in her hair. "I'm sorry," he choked out, the words ragged. "I'm so sorry. I doubted. For a moment, I know," she whispered into his neck, her own tears coming now, hot and fast. "I know, but you came. You chose me." He pulled back just enough to fumble for a knife, sawing through the zip ties. Her hands free, she immediately cupped his face, her thumbs wiping away a smear of blood that wasn't his. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." He caught her hands, holding them against his skin. Did they... "I'm okay," she said, and for the first time she believed it. She was in his arms. The world could be burning down around them, and she was okay. Min-jun appeared at the bay door, giving a sharp nod. "Clear. Choi is down." Jae-hyun didn't even look. His world had narrowed to the woman in his arms. "Let's go home," he murmured. But as he helped her toward a waiting car, Anya's body, pushed far beyond its limits by adrenaline, fear, and illness, finally gave out. The sharp, familiar pain in her side spiked into an agony so intense it stole her breath. Her legs buckled. Jae-hyun caught her as she fell, her face ashen. "Anya?" he asked. She couldn't speak. The world was fading, the pain a white-hot sun at her core. The last thing she saw was his face, etched with a terror deeper than any he'd shown in the warehouse, as he gathered her up and ran. The crossroads were behind them. They had chosen each other, but the path ahead led through a different kind of fire. The world returned in fragments. The sterile smell of antiseptic, the soft, rhythmic beep of a monitor, the distant, muffled sounds of a place that never slept. Anya opened her eyes, not to the vast ceiling of the penthouse or the cracked plaster of her old studio, but to the acoustic tile of a private hospital room. Daylight, soft and filtered, seeped around the edges of closed blinds. She was alive. The knowledge was a quiet, profound thud in her chest. She tried to move, and a dull, deep ache answered from her side, layered with the sharper memory of the warehouse pain. Tubes taped to the back of her hand. An IV stand stood sentinel by the bed. Then she saw him. Jae-hyun sat in a chair pulled flush to her bedside. He wasn't sleeping. He was staring at her hand where it lay on the white sheet, as if by sheer will he could infuse his strength into her. He looked ravaged. Days of stubble shadowed his jaw. His clothes were wrinkled, a simple gray sweater and dark trousers, a world away from his usual armor. The cut on his temple from the car wreck was a faded silver line now, but new lines of exhaustion were etched deeply around his eyes. He hadn't noticed she was awake. His entire being was focused on the slow, steady rise and fall of her chest under the blanket. "Jay?" she whispered. Her voice was a dry rustle. His head snapped up. The transformation was instantaneous. The utter emptiness of his vigil was shattered, replaced by a flood of emotion so raw it stole her breath. Relief, guilt, love, fear, all of it surged into his dark eyes, making them glitter. He leaned forward, his hand covering hers, careful of the IV. His touch was warm, trembling slightly. "You're awake. How long?" 3 days. His thumb stroked the back of her hand. "The stress, it triggered an acute episode. Your kidney function dropped. They've been stabilizing you." The words were clinical, but his voice was rough with unshed tears. They said you fought, like a lion." She remembered the warehouse, the cold, the choice to go limp in his arms. "You came. I will always come." He said it with the absolute finality of a law of physics. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture of such reverent tenderness it made her own eyes fill. "I am sorry for every second you were in that place, for every doubt that crept into my mind. It will never happen again. I have burned that world to the ground for you." She understood. Choi was gone. The betrayal was purged. The kingdom had been toppled, not for power, but for peace. For her. The penthouse, she began, is a beautiful empty box, he finished. It was never a home, it was a waiting room. He reached into the pocket of his sweater and pulled out the small, framed $5 bill. He placed it on the bedside table, facing her. 734-91. This was the first piece of our home. The rest we will build somewhere else, somewhere safe, somewhere quiet, where the only thing that needs guarding is each other. The promise was so vast, so beautiful, it was almost frightening. My illness, Jay, it won't go away. It's a road that only goes one way. He nodded, accepting it fully for the first time without flinching, without the strategist's need to fix it. I know the road. I will walk it with you. Every step, however long it is, we will walk it together. He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. You gave me your last $25 in the rain, Anya. You gave me a future when I thought I had none. Let me carry the weight for a while. Let me be your shelter. A sob broke from her, then another, not from sadness, but from the sheer, overwhelming force of being seen, chosen, and loved so completely in her brokenness, in her truth. He gathered her gently into his arms, holding her as she cried, his own tears falling silently into her hair. When the storm passed, she lay back, spent but lighter than she'd felt in years. What about your work? A ghost of his old, sharp smile touched his lips. I am retired. The Empire has new, less complicated management. My only business now is you. He told her then, in quiet, simple terms, the dissolution of his holdings, the establishment of legitimate, distant trusts, the severing of old ties. It was a dismantling, a deliberate unraveling of the monster to free the man. He had traded a kingdom for a chance at a life, for their life. A week later, she was discharged. Not to the tower, but to a car that drove them out of the city, into the rolling green hills where the autumn leaves blazed like fire. They turned down a long gravel drive, lined with old oaks, leading to a house. Not a mansion, but a sturdy, beautiful stone house with a wide porch and a chimney smoking lazily into the crisp air. A garden, gone wild at the end of the season, waited patiently. Woods stretched behind it. It was private, peaceful, alive. Jae-hyun helped her out of the car, his arms strong around her. Ours, he said simply. Inside it was warm, filled with light from many windows. It was furnished with comfortable, lived-in pieces. Bookshelves waited to be filled. In the kitchen, on a sun-drenched windowsill overlooking the garden, sat 2 pots, the rosemary and the scraggly tomato plant, both transplanted, both thriving. He had brought the living things. That night, they sat on a worn, comfortable sofa before a crackling fire. The silence here was different, not empty, but full of the settling sounds of an old house and the wind in the trees. He had her feet in his lap, rubbing them gently. The doctor called, he said softly, the specialist we met. She has a proposal, a treatment plan. Not a cure, but a better path, slower, more time. He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. Hard is okay, she said, her voice clear and sure. Hard together is everything. He moved then, coming to kneel on the floor before her, taking both her hands in his. The firelight danced over his features, the sharp angles now familiar, now home.
Anya Petrova, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You found me in the rain and spent your last coin on a stranger. You saw the man under the monster. You taught me that mercy is the strongest currency, and that a home isn't a place, it's a person. You are my heart, my redemption, my only eternal echo. He took a deep breath. Marry me, not in a church or with a crowd, but here, by this fire, with the trees as our witnesses.
Let me be your husband. Let me cherish every day, every breath as the miracle it is." Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling, a real, radiant, unburdened smile that lit up the room. She touched his face, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw, the faded scar, the beloved mouth. "Yes," she breathed, 1,000 times yes. He slid a ring onto her finger. It was simple, a band of platinum, cool and smooth. No diamond, just a single deep green stone, the color of rosemary leaves, caught in a delicate embrace of metal. "It's perfect," she whispered. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet and into his arms. He held her, their bodies aligning perfectly, two broken pieces fused into a whole stronger than either had been alone. Then he kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, though that simmered beneath. It was a kiss of promise, of sanctuary, of a journey chosen, hand in hand, into whatever came next. Outside, a soft, cold rain began to fall, tapping against the windows. It was the same rain from that long-ago highway, but it was different now. It wasn't seeping through cracks. It was watering their garden, nourishing the earth where they would plant their roots. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said, the words a vow in the firelight. "I love you, Jay." And in the quiet, echoing heart of their new home, with the rain singing on the roof and the fire whispering on the hearth, they began. Not an ending, but a glorious, tender, courageous beginning. The story of the widow and the kingpin was over. The story of Anya and Jay, of a love built on a $5 bill and an act of impossible grace, had just turned its first beautiful page. This was a story about seeing and being seen, about the courage it takes to hand your last coin to a stranger, and the greater courage it takes to accept it. The specifics are fiction, but the heartbeat is universal. We've all been Anya, offering something precious into the unknown. We've all been Jay, armored up, startled by a grace we don't feel we deserve. So tell me, in your own life's chapter, when did an unexpected connection, romantic, platonic, fleeting, or forever, act as a turning point? Did it alter your direction, show you a part of yourself you'd forgotten, or simply make the world feel less cold for a while? Drop a comment with your truth. No story is too small. In fact, the smallest ones often hold the deepest magic. Let's witness each other.